In the aftermath of the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting on Valentine's Day 2018, a significant number of the surviving students spearheaded activism in an attempt to bring about gun control that may prevent future mass shootings. As activists, these high school students would prove themselves to be organized and well-spoken enough for the motion to be sincerely entertained that they were worthy of the vote. It's the kind of idea that you can't expect everyone to be impressed with, and among those who were unimpressed with this motion was Roaming Millennial, who made a series of arguments against the motion. Her first argument took issue with the fact that many of the same people in favor of lowering the legal voting age were also in favor of raising the legal age that an American can purchase a firearm.
Here's the thing, I am of the belief that owning a weapon, specifically a firearm, is a huge responsibility that requires a lot of maturity. You could really hurt someone, and that someone could be yourself if you're not careful. And furthermore, guns can be great tools for protection, absolutely, but they're also not something you want falling into the hands of the wrong person. When given a gun, the wrong person could do a substantial amount of damage to their community. And what's interesting about that whole spiel is that literally every part of it also applies to voting times 100. Voting is a huge responsibility, something that needs maturity. It has the ability to harm not just an individual or several individuals, but entire nations. And again, it's not something you want in the hands of the wrong people.
At face value, these criteria apply just as well to guns as they do to votes. Not necessarily because guns and votes are all that similar, but because the criteria itself is extremely vague. This applies not just to owning a gun and casting a vote, but driving a car, cooking a meal, building a house, practicing medicine, negotiating business, babysitting, juggling chainsaws, and even offering political analysis. All of these things come with responsibilities, require maturity, could cause people harm and do damage if done by a klutz. That doesn't make them fundamentally similar. The best way to illustrate the fundamental difference between a gun and a vote is our ability to morally judge their use. If a firearm is used in self-defense, we can agree that the right thing was done. If a firearm is used in a school shooting, we will unanimously agree that the wrong thing was done. But when a vote is cast, and let's say a president is elected, well, sure, some people will insist that the wrong thing was done. But plenty of other people will insist that the right thing was done. So, as convenient as it seems to compare these two things on the basis that the wrong people will do the wrong thing, that's just comparing apples and oranges. Granted, this is a very tempting argument to make. It's very tempting to ask the question, why is 16 old enough to vote, but not old enough to orange? Whatever the orange may be. Own a firearm, buy cigarettes, have a beer, sleep with their... The point is that none of these things are fundamentally similar to voting. Roaming Millennial's argument continues when she cites the low intelligence of the average 16-year-old.
When it comes to teenagers, specifically 16-year-olds, let me tell you, as someone who was not too long ago a 16-year-old, they are not ready to vote. Number one, most 16-year-olds just flat out do not know how government works. And I don't mean that to be condescending, right? I mean, hey, you're just 16, you shouldn't be expected to know about all this stuff. And I don't mean that to be condescending. You're still in a stage of your life where you're learning about how the world works, and that's fine, but I would not extend the franchise to an entire group that's still working out the meaning of To Kill a Mockingbird. And I don't mean that to be condescending. How should you be expected to vote on policy issues when you aren't yet familiar with the context and meaning of said policy issues, yet doesn't make any sense?
First, the claim is made that a majority of 16-year-olds don't know how the government works. Whether or not that's actually true is your guess. It could be true, but the only evidence that Roaming Millennial provides is the unremarkable fact that she used to be 16 years old herself. Secondly, there's an admission that teenagers are still learning about how the world works, which, when you word it that way, sounds less like a phase in life and more like life in general. Lastly, there's a crack made about teenagers not getting the meaning of To Kill a Mockingbird, and all of this helps to reveal what might be the weakest premise of this entire argument. If the basis for arguing against giving 16-year-olds the vote is that they're too stupid to be worthy of it, the person making that argument has to have an answer for the often spectacular stupidity on the part of adult Americans.
China? South America, North America, and Canada.
Africa, Asia, United States, I think.
George Bush.
Bush. George Bush Sr.
The Arabic?
The Quran.
No, that I do not know.
It doesn't matter. Everybody's created equal.
What are the chances that the guy with the firecracker in his butt crack has worked out the meaning of To Kill a Mockingbird? Following this, Roaming Millennial's argument arrives at what might be its strongest premise, that being the incomplete development of a teenager's brain.
Teenagers are notoriously and psychologically proven to be bad at decision making. Their brains lack the ability for sufficient forward planning, which I would say is definitely something you want potential voters to be able to do. Okay, 16-year-olds would be scientifically bad voters.
There's no sense in quarreling with the science of this claim because the science is correct. In fact, scientific research of the human brain has found that the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the age of 25. Indeed, there's an argument to be made that the voting age should be raised to 25. For this very reason, but as prone to bad decision-making as teenagers neurologically are, there is a distinction to be drawn between voting and virtually all other decisions that we make in life. Because often, when we talk about the development of the human brain, we focus on impulse control. We focus on rash decisions that were made in the heat of a moment. The kind of decisions that a teenager will make when given a cigarette or a drug, when they're out on a date, when their friends dare them to do something dumb or dangerous, when somebody mocks them or insults them, when they get emotional or nervous or defensive, situations in which a teenager needs to make a good decision right then and right there. But how much of a handicap is a lack of impulse control when we're talking about voting? You can't just run out of the house and cast a vote on a whim, and this is what sets voting apart from nearly all other decisions that we make in life. Even big decisions. You can, impulsively, decide to get married. You can, impulsively, decide to quit your job. You can travel somewhere, purchase something, hurt someone, waste some time, but you cannot spontaneously cast a vote. Votes can only be cast on election day, and in the United States, a presidential election can last, for better or for worse, well over a year. That's a lot of time for a teenager to make and reflect on a decision. Time to research the candidates, watch the debates, read up on the issues, and not least of all, talk. Talk to their parents, talk to their teachers, talk to their friends, their neighbors, anyone. Even the study that Roaming Millennials cited found that adolescents have the knowledge and reasoning ability to make decisions as rationally as adults. And so, even though the brain is not fully developed by the age of 16, the lack of impulse control, which is the Achilles heel of teenage decision making, can potentially be compensated for when it comes to voting. But even if it couldn't, even if all of this was pie in the sky, we still need to shrug our shoulders when Roaming Millennial says things like 16-year-olds would be bad voters. We've already gone down this philosophical cul-de-sac when she argued that we don't want the wrong people voting, lest they do the wrong thing. Well, again, it's not obvious what Miss Millennial means by bad voters. What exactly constitutes a bad voter? Is a bad voter someone who votes for bad candidates? Well, that brings us back to the first counter-argument here. It's all a matter of political opinion. Is a bad voter simply an idiot or an ignoramus? Well, that brings us back to the second counter-argument. There's plenty of stupid grown-ups who vote as well. And if a bad voter is someone whose brain hasn't fully developed yet, Roaming Millennial is a bad voter. In April of 2017, she claimed to be 22 years old. Since she couldn't possibly be 25 years old 10 months later, her prefrontal cortex, the rational part of her brain, was not fully developed when she argued against enfranchising undeveloped brains. That's good enough to be a Monty Python sketch.
And here we are at the start of the first event of the afternoon, the second semi-final of the 100 yards for people with no sense of direction. Well, that was fun, wasn't it?
Now, while reasoning away her own ballot by accident would inadvertently support her third argument, it also brings us back to the third counter-argument. There's plenty of time before Election Day to offset the shortcomings of an undeveloped brain.
And finally, if we did give 16-year-olds the right to vote, you would need to accept that we would have to reevaluate the age at which point people are legally recognized as adults. After all, if you can vote at 16 and have a say in how our government is run, shouldn't you be able to rent an apartment at 16, gamble at 16, purchase pornography at 16? Because seriously, it wouldn't make any sense to give a 16-year-old a say in running government when they don't even have a say in running much of their own lives.
This argument, like the first argument, is a comparison of apples and oranges. In the United States of America, the legal driving age is not 18, the legal working age is not 18, the legal drinking age is not 18, nor is the legal rent-a-car age. But none of these things are cause to re-evaluate the age at which adulthood begins, because none of these things are fundamentally similar. So we don't have to reconsider the age that people become adults if we change the voting age. We certainly can, but we don't have to.
Let's just be honest, okay? We all know these kids are not responsible enough to vote, especially in federal and state level elections, and the only reason this is even being mentioned at all isn't because people are just, oh, so impressed with these handful of teenage activists. It's because they know they'll vote in a way they agree with.
Finally, this point about 16 and 17-year-olds leaning left, while accurate enough at the time that this argument was made, may eventually become inaccurate over the course of time. There's some suspicion that Generation Z will prove to be a conservative counterweight to the progressive Generation Y. Right-wing rebels to their left-wing millennial parents. If that happens, conservatives would be the ones wanting the voting age lowered, but that really should be irrelevant, shouldn't it? This point should not have been brought up in the first place. In closing, picking the proper legal age for just about anything really is always an arbitrary endeavor. There will always be disagreement, there will always be debate, and there will always be opportunities for cheap shots like this.
Democracy is a beautiful but potentially dangerous thing, you guys. Let's not place the future into the hands of people who just a few weeks ago started the craze of snacking on Tide Pods. And I don't mean that to be condescending.
The 45th President of the United States of America, Donald
What? I'm sorry, what's that?
You adjust the microphone as you're told, man.
Oh, you're just overreacting.
I am so sorry!